The Fifth Estate. Tonight.
9/11, the most closely examined day in history, yet one of the most mysterious. So much secrecy.
And because they're classified, I can't tell you what's in those pages.
And so many questions, like what did George Bush know, and when did he know it?
I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV, you know, the TV was obviously on.
We'll show you why the president couldn't have seen what he said he saw, and why there's still so much suspicion.
The attack was made with another method.
Tonight we'll go beyond the conspiracy theories to reveal some startling facts. Facts you likely have not heard before.
And now Bob McEwen.
Good evening, and welcome to the summer season of The Fifth Estate. Throughout the next 2 months, we'll continue to check back on stories we brought you earlier this year. And we begin tonight with the report that kicked off our season last fall. A story as current today as it was then. We called it Conspiracy Theories, and the reaction from you, the viewer, was overwhelming. Emails and letters flowed in, everyone wanting to know more about what happened, or might have happened, on September 11th, 2001. Since we aired Conspiracy Theories first, a few best-selling books have detailed George Bush's preoccupation with Saddam Hussein, perhaps at the cost of identifying terrorist threats. And a special commission has conducted an exhaustive review of the events leading to 9/11. Yet questions about facts and theories linger still. The theories range from the just plain nutty to the enticing, like the amazingly close ties between the Bush, Bin Laden, and Saudi royal families. What many of you also told us was that you want to see this report again. So here is Conspiracy Theories, how truth can be even more troubling than fiction. September 11th, 2001, Lindsay, Ontario, just after 8:45 a.m. The morning was unfolding as usual at the local jail on Victoria Avenue. Inmates back in their cells after breakfast, when it happened. One of the prisoners in Lindsay that day was a man named Delmart Vreeland, called Mike. You've likely never heard of him, but to many, Mike Vreeland has become a symbol of what we know about 9/11 and what we don't. Michael Rupert knows all about Vreeland, a former Los Angeles cop turned 9/11 investigator. On his website, Rupert pulls together information from every corner of the internet that he claims proves the official versions of the tragic events of September 11th are blatantly false.
They don't stand the slightest sniff test, scratch, from anybody who's a trained investigator who's willing to set aside their emotions and just look at the evidence. 9/11 was not an intelligence failure. 9/11 was an intelligence success. It was supposed to happen.
And Rupert says Delmart Mike Vreeland is a key to all of it. So who exactly was that mystery inmate at the Lindsay jail? Well, here's what we know for sure. Mike Vreeland was an American awaiting a trial here in Toronto for credit card fraud. The police said he had a criminal record more than 20 pages long in the U.S. Vreeland himself said that was just a cover story to disguise what he really was, an American spy working for the Pentagon. But here's where it gets interesting. According to Vreeland, about a month before September the 11th, he tried to warn Canadian and American authorities something terrible was going to happen. When no one listened to him, he says he gave his jail guards a sheet of paper, which was sealed and kept unopened until long after 9/11. That October, at a Toronto court, Vreeland's lawyers entered a sheet of paper as evidence. On it were various words and phrases, including World Trade Center, Pentagon, and what they said was Bin Laden. They insisted it was a list of 9/11 targets that Vreeland had uncovered and had been trying to warn the authorities about. In court, police and prosecutors described Vreeland as a career con man, and the judge found no basis to believe his claims. We can't ask him about any of it because Vreeland jumped bail and disappeared. But on the internet, he remains a poster boy for those who believe September 11th was planned as an excuse for the American war on terror.
The moment in time when the world accepted that the intelligence justifying the invasion of Iraq was a lie, that we were sold a war on false pretenses, then 9/11 has to be on the table too. Clearly the United States government could have prevented the attacks, and the United States government held the door open and allowed those attacks to happen.
That seems to be the common denominator of most 9/11 conspiracy theories, that somehow the U.S. government knew those attacks were coming, yet let them take place anyway. But there is one man who goes well beyond that, who because of it has become perhaps the most infamous conspiracy theorist of all. His name is Thierry Meyssan, and his book about 9/11, The Big Lie, was a bestseller in Europe. His website lays out a conspiracy theory that challenges the official story of the September 11th attack on the Pentagon. What we've been told, of course, is that about half an hour after the first two planes crashed into the Twin Towers in New York, a third hijacked aircraft, American Airlines Flight 77, hit the U.S. Defense Headquarters in Washington, killing everyone on board and 125 on the ground. Thierry Meyssan isn't an engineer, but he says he took one look at the smoldering ruins and knew the official story was impossible.
According to the official version, a big plane with 38 meters large and 12 meters high enter in a small door like that into the Pentagon and disappeared. That's obviously stupid. The attack was made with another method.
What other method of attack, you might well ask? Given the size of the hole in the Pentagon and the lack of large pieces of debris, Meyssan concludes the impact could only have been caused by something much smaller than a 767, like a surface-to-air missile. And who could have been behind that? The same people responsible for the destruction of the World Trade Center, says Meyssan. President George W. Bush and U.S. officials. Are you saying you believe George Bush knew about this beforehand?
What I think is that George Bush knew a very small part of the problem.
But you know what? If he knew one part before,
yes,
you're saying he knows it all now. And you're saying...
Yes, of course.
So you're talking about mass murder. You're accusing him of being a heinous criminal.
No. When Mr. Bush decided to make bombardments in Iraq, how many people he kills? What is the difference?
While there was a lot of general intelligence at the time about the possibility of a terrorist attack on American soil, before we go any further, let's be perfectly clear about one thing. We have found no credible evidence that the U.S. government was involved in or had specific advanced knowledge of exactly what would happen on September the 11th. And let's face it, most conspiracy theories pretty much seem like a waste of time, either because they depend on questionable characters like Mike Vreeland or revolve around wild accusations like those of Thierry Meyssan. By the way, we've reviewed Meyssan's theories with aviation experts who tell us, in their opinion, the official stories of what happened at the Pentagon and World Trade Center are consistent with the known facts of both crash scenes. But there's something else to consider here. Because conspiracy theories, as implausible, even offensive as they may seem, are almost always based, at least in part, on legitimate questions. Questions that have remained unanswered since September 11th. You can find them on the internet too. And these days, it's not only those on the fringe who are asking. For example, it's difficult to understand why, in what is some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, it took almost 30 minutes to scramble jet fighters to protect the U.S. Capitol. Too late to prevent American Flight 77 from slamming into the Pentagon. The military's explained that's simply how long it took for the order to be given. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder exactly what President George W. Bush knew about the attack and when he knew it. According to the official White House version, it was at this moment in a Florida classroom that Bush learned the second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that the U.S. was under attack. But here's what George Bush himself said almost 3 months later when asked about September 11th.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And it said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Now, wait a minute. George Bush was told about the second plane while he was inside the classroom. So you just heard him describe seeing the first plane crash on television that day. But that's impossible. No one saw the first plane crash on TV on September the 11th because the videotape of it didn't surface until the next day. So how could George Bush have seen what he said he saw? Of course, there's always the possibility the president simply misspoke. He has been known to do that. But that's precisely the point. It's that kind of inconsistency, especially on the most thoroughly documented day in history, on which conspiracy theories are built. And as we'll soon show you, there's a lot about what happened before and after September 11th that demands a closer look. When we come back, conspiracy or coincidence? The long, tangled history of the Bush family and the elite of Saudi Arabia.
Seems like a very nice reunion with friends. I'm very pleased to be here.
And the young George Bush goes into the oil business, backed by some rich and powerful friends of his own.
Do you have any knowledge of how much money the Saudis put in?
Well, he told me it was in excess of, $1 million.
And George W. Bush would have been aware of that?
Oh, absolutely.
And now we return to the Fifth Estate.
Think of it as a conspiracy theory true or false test. A, when George W. Bush started his first oil company, who helped fund it? Osama bin Laden's brother and brother-in-law. True or false? B, after a terrorist bomb at a barracks in Saudi Arabia killed 19 Americans, who got the multi-million-dollar contract to rebuild? The bin Ladens. True or false? C, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, who was in a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington? George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother. True or false? Actually, the answer could be D, all of the above. Because believe it or not, as far-fetched as they sound, each and every one of those things, the bin Laden link to the Bush Oil Company, the bin Laden construction contract after the terrorist bomb, and the bin Laden-Bush meeting on 9/11, is true. And what that means is that on that awful morning 2 years ago, the day everything seemed to change, the world was already a far more complicated place than most of us could even imagine. In order to truly understand what happened on September the 11th and the close relationship between the Bushes, the bin Ladens, and the rest of the Saudi elite, you have to go back about 25 years and south a couple of thousand kilometers to Houston, Texas, where in the mid-1970s, George W. Bush was a young man just trying to learn the ropes in his family's two businesses, politics and oil. The Bushes were a pillar of Houston society. George Sr. struck it rich in oil, became a congressman, then director of the Central Intelligence Agency, where it's said he first won the friendship of the Saudi royal family by arranging CIA training for their palace guards. And George Jr. was trying to follow in his father's footsteps. A Harvard business grad, he dabbled in politics and the Texas Air National Guard. And it was about the same time that a man named Bill White, a former fighter pilot with a Harvard MBA himself, was recruited to work in Houston with someone with business and personal connections to both George Bushes. His name was Jim Bath.
This fellow, James R. Bath, needed someone to run a series of real estate companies that would be grub-staked by not only the political families, but also by some foreign nationals, the Saudis. And so I